Okay, I know I promised y'all a video on the whole dubs versus subs debate, and that will absolutely be my next video. However, there is a far more pressing matter that needs to be settled once and for all. In what is probably one of the greatest displays of excellence, courtesy of course of Black Twitter, comedian Kyrie took to Twitter posting one of the most controversial tweets of 2020. In a real fight, who would win? PS 118 of Hey Arnold fame, or 3rd Street Elementary, home to those conniving ass kids from Recess? Like any and every analysis and review that I've done from the perspective of someone who has intensively studied writing, psychology, and sociology, this video is fully intended to be in-depth, informative, educational, and entertaining. That said, before I go on to explain how and why 3rd Street Elementary, including those wild-ass kindergartners, and yes, even our girl Spinelli, would, without a doubt, absolutely 150% get their asses beat down by PS 118, I'm going to go ahead and issue a minor content and trigger warning, as well as a spoiler warning for 2 shows that are already over 20 years old. For those of us who watched every single episode of Hey Arnold, we all know that for a children's show, it was considered to be notorious for being heavier and very mature in its unapologetic depictions of both narrative and character-driven themes. If you genuinely feel uncomfortable with these types of themes, especially if the content of this video will trigger you emotionally or psychologically, then listen, I completely get it, okay? I'm black, autistic, queer, and non-binary with plenty of past trauma. There's just some shit on the internet you just don't want to have to see or deal with, and when it's shoved in your face out of the clear blue, it sucks because you haven't had time to mentally prepare yourself or prepare a way to avoid it entirely. I completely respect that your feelings are valid, and fuck anyone else who will tell you otherwise or make you feel lesser for it. That said, I'm giving everyone a 15-second head start to click out of this video, switch apps, or scroll past this post because I love y'all and genuinely care about y'all's mental health and emotional well-being. So, let's hit that clock. Now, before we get to the meat of the debate, it's important, especially for viewers who have never heard of either Hey Arnold or Recess in any capacity, to give a bit of background on both of these iconic 90s shows. Hey Arnold debuted on Nickelodeon in October of 1996. Created by Craig Bartlett, the show centered around the titular character Arnold Shortman, yes he has a last name, a 4th grader with a football-shaped head that attends PS 118 and lives in the hood with his grandparents, Bill and Gertrude, who own and operate the Sunset Arms boarding house. Over the course of the series, we're introduced to an eclectic cast of characters including, but certainly not limited to, Arnold's best friend and the series' token cool black kid Gerald, the totally a tsundere archetype Helga, Helga's best friend Phoebe, Harold, Sid, Stinky, and countless other characters that make up the world and cast of Hey Arnold. Like I said at the beginning of this video, Hey Arnold was a very dark, often graphic, at least by 90 standards anyway, look at the complexities of life for a bunch of white kids living in the hood or the inner city. Listen, we're not gonna sit here and pretend like this show was some kind of masterpiece. I'm so sure Craig Bartlett and Nickelodeon would rather us forget about that one episode titled Rhonda's Glasses, featuring an obvious homage to a black activist, Rosa Parks, that centered Rhonda, an affluent, pompous white girl losing her so-called social standing and having to sit at the back of the bus with the other geeks because she got glasses. However, for all of its faults, what's undeniable is the cultural impact that made Hey Arnold such an iconic series, with its success largely in due part to both its well-written cast of characters, if not entirely diverse, then at least believable and relatable characters, as well as their proximity to the very real-world issues that many people, especially children growing up in the hood, have to deal with on a daily basis. I'd literally be here all day trying to dissect every last real-world issue that the Hey Arnold crew had to deal with. However, some notable examples were, but are certainly not limited to, parental abuse, neglect, alcoholism, poverty, homelessness, addiction, war, prejudice, sexism, body shaming, homophobia, imperfection, religion, mental and emotional disorders, trauma, not fitting into America's so-called perfect idea of a nuclear family, you name it. This show was very dark, oftentimes felt uncomfortably real, and was, again, ultimately unapologetic in its depictions of how the characters, especially the children, were impacted and affected both physically and especially psychologically as a result of their often unsettling circumstances. Hey Arnold in many ways strongly resonated with me and my sister and so many other kids growing up in the hood, particularly children and adults who could easily see themselves in both the characters and the harsh circumstances that were often portrayed in Hey Arnold. For comparison, let's take a look at the series Recess. Recess aired on Disney's and ABC's one Saturday morning block in August of 1997, coming almost an entire year after the release of Hey Arnold. Recess primarily centered its main cast of 6 fourth graders, TJ, Vince, Spinelli, Gretchen, Gus, and Mikey, living their day-to-day lives as students trying to survive the literal and absolute monarchy that is 3rd Street Elementary, and confirmed to be located somewhere in the southern state of Arkansas, although the exact city has never been revealed. Despite Recess also tripping into the same diversity pitfalls that Hey Arnold had, such as the cool, wise, athletic token black friend Vince, among other cringeworthy moments, such as depicting the feral kindergartners as a savage tribe complete with indigenous-inspired garb and facial paint, this show was, to put it bluntly, very progressive, at least for the 90s. Like I said, it's far from perfect. This show was equally as political as Hey Arnold, and anyone who says otherwise is frankly not to be trusted. Aside from the theme song literally having military overtones, it's been confirmed that many of the show's themes and elements are directly inspired and allude to the Cold War. This is especially obvious when you compare the teaching styles of the woke AF literal activist Mrs. Grotke, who grew up as part of 1960s counterculture, to the way more conservative Principal Prickly and Mrs. Finster. Moreover, we see recurring themes and narratives that center social justice, corrupt government, monarchy, communism, and anarchy that often have the students fighting for their ideals of social justice and typically in direct conflict with the adults, but as well as against the other students. Recess, referencing not only the title but the actual act of free time allotted to children in school, is portrayed as a sacred symbol of freedom for the kids, one that is constantly under threat, again, no thanks to the adults. 3rd Street Elementary can be, for all intents and purposes, considered a relatively accurate depiction that mirrors traditional human society, complete with all of the expectations of upholding strict values and societal norms, often forcing the kids to choose between individuality and conformity. Just like Hey Arnold, I could be here all day talking about the complexity and sheer brilliance of this show. But now it's time to get to what really matters. Who would win in a fight, PS 118 or the kids of 3rd Street Elementary? Before we answer that question, it's first important to establish some ground rules in regards to who would be doing the actual fighting. Both PS 118 and 3rd Street are confirmed elementary, aka grade schools located in the US, with Arnold's city of Hillwood being a mixture of Brooklyn, Portland, and Seattle. 3rd Street is confirmed to house students from kindergarten to 6th grade, and since PS 118 doesn't have a confirmed cutoff rate based off of the busted but standard American schooling system, we'll assume for now that PS 118 follows the traditional rules of K through 6th grade as well. So, for the sake of argument and for the sake of our imaginary battle royale, let's say that everyone allowed to participate must be a student between grades K through 6, which excludes adults like Monkey Man and Pigeon Man. And second, a character that's appeared in multiple episodes and is known and remembered enough in both fandoms to be considered a regular appearing character. So for the 3rd Street crew, realistically, we're looking at TJ and his clique, the Ashleys, maybe, King Bob and his cronies, the kindergartners, and Randall the Snitch, assuming he didn't run and go and call the cops first for that reward. I feel like I'm maybe missing a few people, but for the sake of keeping this list condensed and not convoluted, let's say for now we've got our team for 3rd Street. Probably the best thing about this entire debate is that fans both in support and not in support of 3rd Street aren't even taking into consideration the main 3rd Street clue, including TJ and his clique, to throw down. They're all banking on Spinelli to do the fighting for them. So before I tell y'all why Spinelli would, in fact, get her ass washed like a dirty dish, let's look at PS 118. We've got Arnold, Gerald, Helga, Harold, Sid, Stinky, Phoebe, Rhonda, and yes, I'm including Rhonda because even with her stank-ass attitude, she actively plays and kicks ass in a lot of contact sports, so she's about the business. Curly the class sociopath, Torvald, Big Patty, Wolfgang, maybe Brainy, and sure, let's even throw in Big Gino because he literally runs a mini mafia that will do whatever he says, so even if he's not the one doing the fighting, kind of like King Bob. I'm so tempted to include Eugene because he's quote-unquote a jinx, and while it's perfectly plausible that his bad luck would be the entire reason why PS 118 would lose, we've even seen him get pretty dark and aggressive, so sure, why not? Now that we've got our teams, let's narrow it down to the quote-unquote best fighters on each side. Starting with PS 118, we've got Arnold, who is a literal black belt, Helga, Harold, Gerald, Big Patty, Torvald, and Wolfgang. I'll even throw in Curly because, you know, the whole being a literal sociopath thing. If we're analyzing what PS 118's best fighters have going for them, it's not only their ability to collaborate and overcome impossible, even life-threatening obstacles together that we need to be looking at. Their greatest strength and ultimately what makes them a powerhouse, fully capable of easily sweeping the 3rd Street kids with ease, is none other than their collective shared trauma, rage, despair, sorrow, and frustration that encompasses both their individual selves, often as a result of their often toxic and violent surroundings and or upbringing that ultimately make them literal powder kegs of repression waiting to explode. We've seen nearly each of these kids get into some kind of physical altercation isolation, develop some type of aggression-triggered coping mechanism, or in many cases, spiral downwards into full-blown psychosis. And while it can definitely be argued that the kids of PS 118 are somewhat conscious enough of their actions to know when to pull back, if we're talking about an all-out, no-holds-barred, edge-snatching street fight, then you better believe PS 118 is bringing all of that with them to the battlefield. However, when analyzing the strengths of the suburbanite 3rd Street clique, certain fans can agree. What 3rd Street lacks in physical strength, they make up for their amazing skills of organization and planning. But if the opening animation of Recess is supposed to be, I don't know, some kind of indication of their overall scheming skills, where all of their supposed careful planning is blown apart in less than 3 seconds, well, okay, but fine. To be fair, that wasn't them at their best. It was simply meant to highlight the fact that, yes, these 4th graders are completely capable of uniting, planning, and executing certain actions to meet whatever goal they have in their sights. We've seen in multiple episodes that 3rd Street's tactics are heavily based in guerrilla warfare, usually organized by their best and most intelligent tacticians. Gus, who comes from a strict military background, and Gretchen with her literal Einstein levels of intelligence. Realistically speaking, in terms of our battle royale, if 3rd Street had enough time in advance, as well as the home court advantage, then I don't doubt for a second that they would definitely give PS 118 a run for their money. But we're not talking about guerrilla warfare. We're talking about a good old-fashioned exchanging of the hands. When narrowing down 3rd Street to its best fighters, certain fans are convinced that Spinelli is the only one who would walk away with just a scratch or two. And you know what? I thought the exact same, except, well, we've actually never seen Spinelli get into a fight. Make no kind of mistake, Spinelli is a badass and she will forever be one of our childhood's greatest characters. However, Spinelli is only ever seen threatening physical violence, usually just relying on her powers of verbal intimidation to get the job done. In the episode The Trial, where Spinelli is accused of throwing a dirt-covered rock at Randall's head, it's revealed that Spinelli would have actually gone through with it, but instead chose not to, opting out to save Miss Finster's cat from a nearby tree instead. So while the inclination to act on her violent thoughts is clearly there, evidenced by her strong interest in wrestling, we never actually see her fight anyone. As also evidenced from the episode Parents' Day, Spinelli's parents are embarrassingly sweet and good-natured suburbanite people. While Spinelli's anger towards her mother's constant pushing of her toxic ideals of femininity onto Spinelli is totally and completely justified, Spinelli still grew up in a warm, loving, and safe environment without the threat of violence or neglect from her family. That's what most people aren't taking into consideration when both sides of the argument boil down to not PS 118 versus 3rd Street, but ultimately Spinelli versus Helga. So if the question is, who would win in a fight, then listen y'all, I'm putting all my money on the neglected, traumatized, and famously emotionally unstable Helga from the hood, who we've seen has no problem with consistent acts of violence, no matter how they may be played for laughs. Speaking from the very personal experience of being born and raised on the very violent south side of Chicago, with plenty of anger and past trauma to boot, Spinelli or any of 3rd Street trying to step to Helga and the PS 118 crew is like someone being born and raised in the northwest suburbs of Aurora, Illinois, running around talking shit and claiming they're from the mean streets of Chicago, only to meet and get their asses handed to them by someone actually from the streets of Chicago. Shout out to everybody who understood that reference. However, to finally bring a close to this video, I will say, as far as believable scenarios go, even if Helga did mop the floor with Spinelli, and because speaking fundamentally they're both so similar, they'd probably wind up with a great respect for one another, become good friends, and then run the streets with Big Patty. Oh my god, someone please make a fan comic of this. I could totally see this happening with the main clique of PS 118 and 3rd Street Elementary. Everyone fights, realizes they're not so different, and then they're all BFFs for life. But what do you all think, viewers and listeners? Where do you stand on the PS 118 versus 3rd Street debate? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to North Caesar Entertainment for even more videos like these where I give in-depth, informative, educational, and entertaining analyses and reviews of your favorite anime, manga, video games, and more.